On this Sunday night, remembering Murray Sinclair, the memorial service for a former senator and Indigenous rights champion, how he became a beacon for truth and reconciliation.
Him and his family will always be important to me and sacred, really, to me.
Canada's first human case of bird flu detected.
We do know this infection can be lethal.
Investigating the source of the exposure. Israel's prime minister and the next American president talk peace in the Middle East. The phone calls as Netanyahu and Trump seek to strengthen their alliance. And in their own words,
we're connected to a legacy of sacrifice.
The stories of war and homecoming in the new online exhibit honoring our veterans.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Carolyn Jarvis.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. There was an outpouring of heartfelt tributes today to a titan of Indigenous rights. Indigenous leaders and Canadian politicians gathered in Winnipeg to pay their respects to the Honourable Murray Sinclair at his memorial service. The former judge and senator was the Chief Commissioner of Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He died last Monday at the age of 73. As Iris Dyck reports in our top story tonight, Sinclair is being remembered as a vanguard who helped this country face its dark past and shine a light on the way forward.
An advocate, a trailblazer, and a friend and role model to so many. Family, officials, and community gathered Sunday to honor the late Murray Sinclair. His spirit name, Mijanagijakiban, one who speaks of pictures in the sky.
A really great Canadian, a person who is an Anishinaabe Anini, a person who has cared for all of us for so long, and today we will care for him.
About 3,000 people assembled at the Canada Life Centre in downtown Winnipeg to commemorate his life and his work, which changed the nation forever.
He grew up in a time when we probably couldn't even vote, right? And to change the history of that and come make his way through the legal system is absolutely astounding.
Sinclair became Manitoba's first Indigenous judge in 1988 and co-commissioned the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry, exposing racism in the justice system. Attendees shared memories.
I will miss his counsel. I'll miss his phone calls. I'll miss his text messages.
And parting wishes.
I'm sure by now Murray's found Riel up there somewhere, and they're probably having a good chat.
We love you. You know, us survivors love you, Murray.
His contribution to Indigenous rights in Canada, immeasurable.
He believed that while it would entail hard work and tough conversations, it was possible to change hearts and minds.
He was a first. He was the first Indigenous person of almost every single room in a time in which Indigenous peoples were not welcome in courtrooms, in boardrooms, classrooms.
Sinclair spent 6 years as chair of the National Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The final 94 recommendations, a path for a better way forward.
We had the whys. He answered the whys for me about why 3 generations of my family attended residential school, my grandmother, my mother, and myself, and why I didn't have a mom and a dad.
He brought pride back to our people without anybody realizing what was happening, as the change was happening. You've seen the people, Indigenous people, stand up and begin to defend their rights, begin to stand up for injustices.
A legendary life and a legacy that will continue for generations to come. Iris Dyck, Global News, Winnipeg.
To news out of BC now, where the province's health ministry says the first suspected human case of avian influenza in Canada has been detected. A teenager in British Columbia has tested positive for the virus, also known as bird flu, which can be fatal. Health officials are trying to determine the source of the exposure. As Global's Darya Zargar reports, there have been several cases detected in animals, but this is the first time it's crossed over into a human.
So what we know right now is the teen who tested positive is in the Fraser Health region. There's no word on their condition or where exactly in Fraser Health they're located. The province launched a public health investigation to pinpoint the source of the exposure, which will likely be a bird or other animal. Health officials are also reaching out to anyone who's been in contact with the teen. Now, one expert says the main concern is that this virus can mutate and can change if more infections occur, adding that it has epidemic and pandemic potential.
Now, it does spread to humans if you have direct contact with a sick animal, or if you are even in close contact, because this is an infection that does spread through the air. So people in close contact can get infected with this. And fortunately for now, it's not very efficiently transmitted from person to person or from mammal to mammal.
Since October 21st, there have been 22 detected outbreaks in BC. A vast majority of those are in the Fraser Valley. As you can see here, most of those populating in Chilliwack and Abbotsford.
We're always concerned about the potential for an avian influenza infection on a farm. It's devastating for the farmers involved. And we all care about our animals and producing good food for British Columbians.
The bird flu is rare in humans. Possible symptoms can show up in the form of a respiratory infection. Officials are recommending several preventative measures, including staying away from dead birds or animals. Carolyn?
Darya Zargar in Burnaby, thank you for that. Efforts to resolve a labor dispute at BC ports hit a roadblock today. There was hope the work stoppage would be resolved this weekend as the union met with federal mediators. But now union leaders are accusing the Employers Association of cutting off talks after just 12 minutes of discussion. Trouble is also brewing at the Port of Montreal, where workers there face a lockout tonight unless they too accept their employer's final offer. Turning now to the provincial election in Nova Scotia, which is a little over 2 weeks away. Tonight, Tammy Jakeman, a candidate for the NDP, is out of the race after making anti-Semitic comments. Jakeman posted inappropriate comments on social media about the state of Israel, while also belittling Holocaust remembrance efforts. She has since apologized, but she is no longer running. Among the top issues in that upcoming Nova Scotia election, the cost of living. Party leaders have made various promises aimed at making life more affordable in the province. Heidi Petracek explains what they're proposing and why the economy is once again dominating the ballot box.
Ask on the streets and it's clear. Nova Scotia voters are worried about the cost of living.
So definitely lower taxes.
Just anything to help improve a cost of living, just because it's gone up very high so quickly.
So it's inevitable that promises meant to ease financial stress have been flying fast and furious in the provincial election campaign. The official platforms for the incumbent PC party and the opposition Liberals both bet big on reducing the HST and income tax. But there are other commitments too. From the PC leaders' pledge to scrap Halifax's bridge toll for thousands of commuters.
Our way of saying to people, we see you, we understand the pressure, and we'll do what we can.
To the NDP's pitch to enact rent control.
The last piece of legislation the Premier passed raised the rent cap to over double CPI and made it easier to evict tenants.
As the Liberals push to eliminate tax on certain items at the grocery store.
Everyone's favorite rotisserie chickens. People are still paying HST on a lot of the foods left in our grocery store, and we're just going to get rid of that.
Cost of living concerns aren't isolated to the Nova Scotia election, of course. We now know affordability played a big part in the result of the American election and will likely loom large in the next federal election, too.
And that's what you have to be very careful about in an election cycle when many people are feeling the tough times upon them. People will be selfish and think about their own needs, their family first, that kind of stuff. And the social issues, the bigger ticket issues, will probably come second.
With 2 weeks of campaigning left to go in Nova Scotia, there are likely more measures aimed at voters' pocketbooks to come. Each party hoping its promises stick with voters most, all which come at a cost, of course, for whoever forms the government. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
In the U.S., President-elect Donald Trump is cementing his landslide election win from earlier this week. The latest results show he's now taken the battleground state of Arizona. That means Trump has swept every key swing state of this election. As Bianca Ficini reports, it caps off a resounding defeat for Democrats, who are now trying to figure out how to move forward.
U.S. President-elect Donald Trump winning Arizona and taking all 7 swing states. That brings his tally of Electoral College votes to 312, compared to Vice President Kamala Harris's 226. The victory for Trump came days after the election because Arizona takes notoriously long to count votes due to the many voting options it offers voters. Trump lost Arizona to President Joe Biden in 2020. The two will meet again in Washington this week. Control of the House of Representatives is still up in the air. Dozens of races are uncalled and votes are still being counted. But if Republicans gain control, on top of their Senate takeover, it could make it easy for President-elect Trump to get legislation through Congress. The big shift to the right has led Democrats to doing some soul-searching.
We did not have a compelling enough economic vision. The Democratic Party should have one simple mission, and that is to address the economic hardships and struggles of many Americans.
That sentiment echoed by Senator Bernie Sanders, who published an op-ed titled, "Democrats Must Choose, the Elites or the Working Class." And as usual, the cast of Saturday Night Live gave its take on Trump's sweeping win after giving Harris a guest appearance days before the election.
We at SNL would like to say to Donald Trump, we have been with you all along.
Now that the dust has settled, Democratic lawmakers and voters alike are bracing for a second Trump term. Bianca Ficini, Global News, Washington.
A promise of peace, but at what cost? Coming up, what Donald Trump's presidency could mean for Israel, Palestinians, and the Middle East. Plus, what Trump discussed in his latest conversation with Vladimir Putin as the war in Ukraine heads to uncertainty. That's the aftermath of a deadly Israeli strike on the Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza's north. The pre-dawn attack leveled a family home being used as a shelter for displaced Palestinians as Israel intensifies its bombing campaign. The strike killed at least 33 people, including 9 women and 13 children. The death toll is expected to rise as rescuers search the debris. Israel says its attack targeted Hamas militants. There is uncertainty across the Middle East about how a Trump presidency will impact the widening conflict. Today, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu revealed he and Trump have spoken several times since Trump won the presidency, and that the two see eye to eye and are seeking to strengthen their alliance. Mackenzie Gray reports.
The search is on in northern Lebanon to try and recover the victims from an Israeli airstrike. The head of the local civil defense saying 24 are dead, 8 sent to hospital. Similar scenes in the east where 3 people were killed, 2 injured when this man's home was bombed by Israel. The enemy is a butcher, he says, with no pity nor mercy at all, even for children. That enemy now declaring a partial victory. We defeated Hezbollah, says the newly appointed Israeli defense minister. Now it's our job to continue the pressure. A job that will now likely get easier with Donald Trump as president. A staunch Israel supporter who moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem during his first term, and an ally of Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu, who says he spoke with Trump 3 times since becoming president-elect.
I want to see the Middle East get back to peace, and real peace, but a peace that's going to be a lasting peace.
Trump providing no details on how he'd achieve that, but a potential Secretary of State pick is providing a roadmap.
He's going to focus on Iran, because the cause of this is the Iranian funding and training of Hamas, of Hezbollah, of the Houthis.
Hamas leaders being told by the Qatari government to leave the country, according to CNN. Qatar also suspending mediating peace talks, which had been taking place in Doha.
Whatever Hamas is saying publicly, what they are communicating to the mediators is no, we will not do a ceasefire and hostage deal at this time.
The Biden administration with now just over 2 months left to try and find a ceasefire between 2 parties that seem to have their eyes on who the next U.S. president will be. Mackenzie Gray, Global News, Ottawa.
To the other major global conflict in Ukraine, where it's also unknown what impact a Trump presidency will have. Trump has spoken with Ukraine's president, and today, reports from the Washington Post that he spoke with the Russian president on Thursday, urging Vladimir Putin not to escalate the war, reminding him of, quote, Washington's sizable military presence in Europe. Despite that warning from Trump, overnight, both Russia and Ukraine launched their most significant drone strike since the beginning of the war. Russia fired a record 145 drones at Ukraine, wiping out military, energy, and civilian infrastructure across the nation. Meanwhile, Ukraine targeted 6 regions in Russia, including Moscow, forcing commercial flights to be diverted from 3 of its airports. Ahead, running out of time and food. How one maritime food bank is now having to screen its clients to keep up with demand. Food banks across the country are dealing with an unprecedented surge in demand. In its recent report, Food Banks Canada said the country marked a grim milestone in 2024, with over 2 million visits in 1 month alone. Among the provinces seeing an increase, New Brunswick, where organizers in Moncton have reintroduced financial screening of its clients to ensure the limited food they have is reaching those most in need. Suzanne Lapointe reports.
The Peter MacKay Community Food Centre is overwhelmed with the growing demand in Canada's fastest growing city. They've had to put an end to the relaxed screening requirements they had during the pandemic in order to keep the number of appointments manageable.
So now that everybody's returned to work, for the most part, even though things are still difficult, we're just looking at each client and we're just being more responsible in the service that we provide.
She says that involves checking in with clients to make sure they still live in Moncton and inquiring about their current salary and living expenses. She adds no one would be refused food in an emergency, but they would be asked to come back and provide those details to determine what type of help is appropriate going forward. Taylor says they are serving a more diverse clientele, which includes many newcomers and international students.
We're trying to work with each of the schools and to try to help support pantry programs. So we're taking a look at students, and we know that the cost of living is a lot more for them when they get here than they realize. So we're helping out with that too, but we're also working with the schools to help build that relationship and help them.
She says Université de Moncton students in need are given immediate help and asked to go over their financial details with someone who works at the school to determine if they qualify for ongoing help.
There is this shame of talking about poverty, talking about food, talking about the challenge that we can face as young adults, but I know a couple of students that use the food bank, and also a couple of them that don't have any jobs, so they have to, sustain themselves from their pocket, like the money they brought back from their country. So the challenges are really real.
A challenge many are facing with limited resources for help. Suzanne Lapointe, Global News, Moncton.
Next, giving life to the stories of our veterans. The new online exhibit honoring Canadian vets in their own voices. Residents at Canada's largest care facility for veterans woke to a sea of red and white on their front lawn this morning. Now in its 13th year, Operation Raise a Flag honors veterans with 30,000 Canadian flags planted outside the Sunnybrook Veterans Centre in Toronto. The fundraiser will help revitalize the centre, home to nearly 200 veterans. Canadians will pause tomorrow for Remembrance Day, honoring the sacrifices of our veterans. And a new online exhibit by the Canadian War Museum is giving life to our veterans' experiences. It's called In Their Own Voices, and it shares the accounts of more than 200 veterans and their families. They served in conflicts around the world, including Afghanistan, Bosnia, Korea, and Germany. Tonight, we share a selection of the stories with you.
I served in 2008 with the Operational Mentor and Liaison team. So as such, I was the leader of a team of Canadians that was embedded with a company of Afghan National Army reconnaissance soldiers. A lot of the time, it's young men and women who serve in war, who serve on military operations since the Second World War, but they spend most of their lives not being in uniform. They have that whole period of their life afterwards, and we often forget about that. Going through these interviews, I think, is a really great way of humanizing it, because you're looking at video footage of one person, flesh and blood, just like you and me, who went through something extraordinary, either personally or because of a family connection. And that does a great deal for helping us find understanding.
My father was with the Canadian forces who were sent to Hong Kong in 1941. The attack was very sudden, and the Canadians had to surrender within 3 weeks, and so he was a prisoner of war for 4 years. In those days, you have to remember, PTSD was not understood, it wasn't even named. Men were supposed to come back, and women, from their service and just fade back into civilian life. There was no effort to understand what might have happened to them, psychological needs. This exhibition allows you to really meet the people, hear the stories, hear the hurt they've had and how they've had to fight their way back into civilian life.
We're connected to a legacy of sacrifice. All of those battle honors are now carved on the same monuments. That's a golden thread that connects us to the soldiers of yesteryear.
And Donna Friesen will anchor live coverage of this year's National Remembrance Day ceremony in Ottawa tomorrow morning at 10:30 Eastern, 7:30 Pacific here on Global Television, at globalnews.ca, and all of our streaming platforms. And that is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Carolyn Jarvis. Tonight's Your Canada is the Newfoundland National War Memorial in St. John's. We love seeing your Canada. Please keep emailing your photos to globalnational@globalnews.ca. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.